Yeah, so we want to move on to Mitch and the rest of the programming, but please know that we have recorded all of the programming we did from the space program from yesterday and today. It will take us a while to get that out on the interweb um, because I don't do that. Other technical people do that anyway, and they'll do it much better than me. But we'll have that out here in a few days, and you'll be able to see all of this programming, spliced and diced, etc. So please look forward to that. So Mitch, I'd like to bring it back to you, and if you would, we're going to try to stay out of your way because people want to hear these brilliant people speak.
I'm trying. Okay, I'm getting my video started.
There you go. Good to see you, sir. So
Good
yeah,
to see you guys.
We want you guys.
Go ahead, Dave.
I'm going to say, just take it from here, etc. We'll try to stay out of your way as much as we can for the rest of your programming.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. That certainly was a good tone-setting keynote from General Murray. Of course, we're very thankful for the time that he invested this morning and for his service and for the work that Army Futures Command does. The General mentioned that we'll be hearing here shortly from Colonel Lynn Rosenoff in our first morning panel, and then in our second panel, General Ross Kaufman, who, by the way, the General mentioned Ross Kaufman out in the desert. I actually, he took a meeting from me in the front seat of his Humvee in the middle of the humid desert. So that's commitment right there. Hey, if you guys are, if you folks are just joining us, I'm Mitch Johnson with Curtis Process Consulting. And I have the privilege of supporting the morning activities, and I'm going to move us right along with our program now. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce our next guest. He is Keith Flail. Keith is an executive vice president with Bell and leader of its future vertical lift programs, including the design, production, and fielding of next generation military aircraft for the DoD and its allies. A couple of notable programs that I'm sure Keith will probably touch upon includes the V-280 Valor tilt rotor and the Bell 360 Invictus. A little bit more about Keith. He is a West Point graduate, retired Army aviator, and acquisition expert. Welcome, Keith.
Thanks, Mitch. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I can hear you just fine, and I can see you. It's good to see you again. I guess our last in-person chat would have been the March event, Defense Innovation Summit, hosted by our friends at the Capitol Factory in Dallas. So let me first offer some much-deserved thanks and gratitude for your continued support of the America's Future Series, and of course the support of Bell, who is our sponsor for today's Defense Innovation Summit. With that said, now Keith, I'm gonna pass the baton to you and ask that you share some insights about the great work that's going on within Bell. Over.
All right, thanks, Mitch. First of all, appreciate getting the opportunity today to be part of this great event. So what I want to touch on very briefly was just what Bell is doing in terms of applying advanced technologies in line with a lot of what General Murray just covered. So we are very proud to be participating within the Army-led Future Vertical Lift programs, and under the umbrella of Future Vertical Lift, both on the Future Long Range Assault Aircraft, the FLRAA effort, as well as the Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft, the FARA effort. So for the Long Range Assault Aircraft effort, certainly the Black Hawk has served the Army incredibly well for decades, and looking at the opportunity here to revolutionize vertical lift with the FLRAA as it replaces the Black Hawks within the fleet, as well as for the Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft, really reintroducing that manned scout reconnaissance element back in to multi-domain operations. So as we've seen, again, the current fleet, it's served our soldiers incredibly well, but now with some of the new demands that we have with the threats that are out there that have really eroded some of our overmatch, becomes incredibly important to develop these new capabilities for our soldiers. So when you look at multi-domain operations in particular, when you talk about the penetration and the disintegration phase of how important the Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft is to those operations in terms of lethality, And when we talk about lethality, it's not just the organic lethality of the platform, but really that outsourced lethality. A lot of what General Murray was talking about in terms of how you exercise the network and get all those sensor to shooter links in place so that the FARA can perform as kind of that battle captain out there that's linking to the long range precision fires and everything else that's part of the modernization. And then with the FLRAA aircraft, really in that exploitation phase, in terms of having twice the speed and twice the range of what you have with today's vertical lift assets, and how you take advantage of those temporary periods of dominance in terms of exploitation. And a lot of what we've been able to do as a government industry team, really back to the joint multi-role effort that was focused more on the FLRAA offering. The last 7+ years, really been able to reduce risk and inform requirements to move that program forward, really in an unprecedented fashion, with all the cost sharing that's been done between government and industry to really burn down that risk. And now that we move out on the FARA program, we're finalists and very proud to be for both of these programs, really exercising that same playbook in terms of working with our Army customer and seeing what we can do to go incredibly fast to field those capabilities. And for that program, looking at having an aircraft on the ramp in the summer of 22 to start ground runs, and then first flight in the fall. So we're very proud in terms of our V-280 Valor with our Team Valor industry teammates, as well as our Team Invictus for our Bell 360, to bring forward these platforms that have exceptional performance, but at an affordable cost, and ensuring that we bring reliable and maintainable solutions to our soldiers. One thing that we also focus on from the start is the integration of critical life cycle sustainability from the outset. So a lot of what we can now do, because of where the technology is we use what we call the digital thread and the central data source. So the first time we go and we design all of these platforms with our teammates, and we're able to design remote with a lot of our folks not necessarily having to be together as we do the detailed design with the respective components of the aircraft. And once you have that central data source for the aircraft, you really get to apply it over the entire life cycle. So it really makes it much more efficient downstream in terms of your technical publications, your interactive training manuals, and really being able to put, as an example, soldiers into an augmented reality or a virtual reality environment. So the first time they're doing maintenance tasks or they need to work on a gearbox, they're doing that in an augmented or virtual world, because folks often say that 50% of the maintenance can be caused by 50% of the maintenance. So how do you do maintenance smarter, and how do you improve and extend the maintenance-free operating periods of these aircraft so that they're more affordable over the long haul? So that's a lot of what we're focused on with the digital thread and the central data source. I'd like to touch briefly on the workforce. Very proud of our Valor and Invictus teammates and everybody here on the Bell team, as we've been able to continue to make the appropriate progress through COVID, just like everybody else is having to work through the challenges of the pandemic. But we are proud to say that we're on track for both of these programs in terms of supporting Army modernization and making smart investments like the 360 and the 280, without breaking the budget. Is incredibly important that we support our Army to give these modernized capabilities at an affordable price point. And next, as the day goes on, really excited to hear about other approaches that folks are taking out there to support modernization. So with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce to all of you the Honorable Patrick J. Murphy. He is America's first Iraq war veteran elected to the U.S. Congress, and later served as the 32nd Under Secretary of the Army. Secretary Murphy is currently a Senior Managing Director at Ankura. He's the Distinguished Chair of Innovation at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and a Commissioner on the U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Patrick serves as a Director on several public and private held companies, and is a graduate of King's College Army ROTC program and the Widener University Commonwealth School of Law. He has 2 young children, Maggie and Jack, and they reside in Pennsylvania. So with that, sir, over to you.
Hey, Keith, thank you so much. I'm a big fan of Bell and your work there with Future Vertical Lift, where you're going twice as fast for twice the distance. And I appreciate it. Really helps our men and women, especially in that golden hour. So I want to say thank you. One of the executives there is Jenny Williamson. We served together with the 82nd Airborne Division in Evasion, Iraq. She's a great American. And Keith, really appreciate all that you continue to do for our nation. Hey, a warm welcome to everybody for today's American Future Series Defense Innovation Summit and our first two morning panel discussions. You know, I have to have a confession to make. When I first saw Murray Media and I knew General Mike Murray spoke earlier, and Scott and David, I know you do a great job, and thank you also, Mitch. I thought it meant Mike Murray was a new career in media. So, but I know it's Scott's show, and just want to say it's really great to be with all of you here today. You know, our overarching theme this morning is advanced technology and national security. Our first group is comprised of leaders who have come to share their insights and their experiences in partnering to leading technologies and applications, as well as the associated development success factors. So the first panel is going to be immediately followed by the second morning session, and that's comprised of leaders who will share their views on requirements and capabilities. We all know how important requirements are, but also the needs and use cases. So our second panel is going to begin promptly at 11 o'clock. So let's get started with our first panel. So first, let's welcome our panelists. We look forward to you in a lively and really enlightening dialogue. And while I will ask questions, we do want to have the give and take with all of you, because we have a lot of ground to cover. I'm going to offer a brief introduction to all of our panelists. So let me start. Even though I'm an Army guy, I'm going to start with Navy. Captain Frank Futcher. He's a career Navy supply officer and currently assigned to the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, and serves as Director of Naval X. Next, we have Colonel Len Rosenoff. He is the Director of Army Applications Laboratory, AAL, responsible for establishing the vision and energy of AAL and nurturing relationships with key Army and commercial stakeholders. Colonel Rosenoff guides the team forward to connect startups, entrepreneurs, tech companies, VCs, universities, research labs, and others with the right people, the right problems, and organizations in the Army to report and support the future force modernization enterprise. Next, we have Colonel Nathan Diller. He's an Assistant Director of Aeronautics at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, as well as the Director of AFWorks and a team lead for Agility Prime, an Air Force program to collaborate with investors, industry, and interagency to rapidly build a commercial transformative vertical flight market that remains accessible to the Department of Defense. Next, we have Mr. Michael Brown. He's Director of the Defense Innovation Lab, DIU, which is the only organization within the department to exclusively accelerate commercial technology into the department. Mike has more than 20 years of commercial experience leading successful Silicon Valley companies like Systemic and Quantum. Mike is also the author of DIU Case, the China Study, which shined a light on China's investment in some of the nation's top technology areas. And last but not least, we have Mr. Nan Mulchandani. He is the Chief Technology Officer and Acting Director of the U.S. Department of Defense Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. He brings more than 25 years of experience in the technology industry as a serial entrepreneur and senior executive in the enterprise infrastructure and security software industries, to his service in the government to help transform the Department of Defense in adopting next generation AI and software technologies. He's a non-resident fellow at Harvard Belfer Center in Science and International Affairs. So why don't we just give a quick welcome to the panelists, And before we get started, I'll offer some quick ground rules. I'm going to ask each panelist a question, and we're going to specify a time for everyone, which may include them, the other panelists that chime in, as I mentioned. And time permitting, we're going to go through 2 rounds of questions for each of these panelists. And about 10 minutes remaining, my intent is to allow each panelist to offer their quick closing remarks. So hopefully that goes well as a plan. Let's get after it. Captain Futcher, how is Naval X transitioning emerging technologies in the programs and platforms today?
Secretary Murphy, thank you for the kind introduction. And yeah, I'm happy to speak a little bit about Naval X. Out of these sort of new sort of innovation entities, Naval X is probably the newest. We're just about, we're 18 months old now. You know, stood up by Secretary Gertz as a way to sort of enact change across the Navy in some key areas. So when we talk about emerging tech and the transition of technologies into programs, we do that in a number of ways. One of our key focus areas or mission areas that we've created is called Tech Bridges. And in fact, last week we just announced the 13th Tech Bridge, the London Tech Bridge. So there's 12 now across the US, and now we called it a national network, and now it's a global network. So what these are very much like our Naval X headquarters, where we have a place sort of out in town that's a little bit easier for non-traditionals and small businesses, startups, entrepreneurs to really access. So that's been one of our key mission areas, is standing up these key tech bridges as a way to sort of connect into these innovation ecosystems. And the Tech Bridge is really, you know, a platform for collaboration. So if you think about, you know, an innovation ecosystem and sort of the businesses, you know, that sort of end up standing up and growing sort of around, let's say, a lab or even a university. So the Tech Bridge is really there to sort of connect into, you know, the accelerators, the incubators, to really understand and create sort of relationships with a lot of these businesses, with academia, with the private sector. So at its heart, it's really a platform for collaboration. And to really get to that piece where we start this innovation pipeline, we really need to grow the relationships with that local community. And I'll give you an example. The up in the Northwest, our Northeast Tech Bridge, our New England Tech Bridge, that entity is you know, has obviously a lot of interest in the undersea technologies and composites. Composites is a part of that industry up there. You have the boating industry. So we have a partnership, for example, with the Manufacturing and Extension program up there. That's a Department of Commerce NIST program up there. And so working with them, we have additional sort of access to a lot of the small businesses that, you know, sort of engaged on a lot of these different projects. So that's just an example of a tech bridge, again, working on undersea sort of needs. And then we have what I would call the innovation pipeline. The innovation pipeline is not something new. It's just a term that we used as a model or a framework for how we sort of think about the transition of the technology. But if you think about Navy, I mean, we've got all these different systems commands, we've got all these different labs who are really, you know, engaged in development of the technology. But very much in the innovation pipeline, it's very, very much disconnected, where you have different kinds of money, different programs, different organizations, different stakeholders. And of course, a lot of the programs, the difficulty of, let's say, a program of record attempting to accept and introduce an emerging technology into a program of record, they do require, you know, I would call it a level of maturity, an ability that they understand that that technology has been de-risked. So what Tech Bridges does is sort of act as sort of a navigator or guide. Some people call it a Sherpa, which again helps, you know, when we work on and collaborate on projects, you know, that we don't allow these projects to sort of fall off. And I don't like to use the term the valley of death, but a lot of times these projects just stop. So part of this is using our Tech Bridges, connecting into the ecosystem, using it as a platform for collaboration, and then using them also as a guide on this sort of technology transition journey. And I think that's going to be key for us, just because of the size and the scale at which the Navy has in terms of its research and development enterprise. So that's just a start opening in terms of how we're thinking about tech transition and trying to sort of de-risk the technology for transition into programs. Back to you, sir.
Great. Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it. Let me turn to Colonel Rosenoff now, if that's okay. Hey, Colonel, how is AAL bringing advanced technologies to bear on Army modernization?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, Secretary Murphy. For AAL, it doesn't happen overnight. And when you think about the industry, when you think about companies and business, I think that on this panel is pretty much a consensus on some of the key barriers of entry into DoD. And frankly, you talked about transparency, access, and capital. And I think each one of us understand that fairly well. For the Army Applications Lab, what was important and what is important is a deep understanding of the Army. And I'll give you an example. 29 years in the Army, and it's as complicated today as it was when I was a second lieutenant trying to figure out how to do an about face. I mean, it really is. And if it's that complicated for me today, I cannot imagine how difficult it is for small business to make their work meaningful and profitable working with the Army. So for us, we thought that going on a deep learning journey in a thoughtful manner about what makes the Army unique, how does the Army work, how do we make this work, and how do we lower those barriers that are really unique to the Army, specific to the Army, that we can address those three issues that I mentioned in the beginning. And I'm not talking about what works on paper. I'm talking about what works in the practical sense. And through that journey, we landed on a business model that represents a whole of acquisition approach that General Murray referred to or alluded to just a little bit ago. That whole of acquisition approach represents Army Futures Command and ASALT working together to really bridge that valley of death. And that requires a lot of additional relationships and stakeholders with folks like the Army Contracting Command and others in order to do this. I'll give you a specific example. Last week, we announced the project launch of Spartan Rate of Fire in support of Program Manager Self-Propelled Howitzer, Tim Fuller, and the LRPF cross-functional team, General Rafferty. What was special about that announcement is that it represented our business model, how AAL operates, and I'll be more specific. From the very beginning, AAL traversed the valley of death. I mean, from the inception. And really what I mean by that is having Colonel Tim Fuller, the program manager, the buyer in this case, obligate his resources, his funding to a project from the very beginning that's going to carry through the lifeline of this project to AAL and to AFC and to ASALT. This represents that traversing of the valley of death. It makes it really special. So what if you're a small business out there, this opportunity potentially leads a small business to scale their solution into the market. And that to us is really the so what if you're a small business, the potential to take your product, your solution, and have the buyer scale it in a program of record. To us, that really means traversing the valley of death. Now, it's not guaranteed. But it does offer those companies that were selected in this instance, the 15 companies that were selected, that opportunity or greater opportunity. I'm sure all the panelists face similar challenges just like us, but really our approach in AAL is unique to the Army, to the Army's culture, and that hybrid approach that we've got to weave in and make it very special to the Army. And we're pretty excited about it. And thank you.
Well, thanks, Len. I appreciate it. And I appreciated General Mike Murray's comment about, to breach that and to traverse that valley of death, we need early buy-in from the PM. So I look forward to double back with you next round of questions. Then we go to Colonel Nathan Dillard. Nathan, let me put you on the spot here and ask you, how can the Department of Defense better work with the commercial sector?
Sure. Secretary Murphy, thanks so much for the opportunity. Really impressive group that you gathered here, folks that are working, I think, on this challenge in a lot of different areas. And we've done some engagement trying to find where there's areas of collaboration. And I think that's ongoing work that we owe really to industry to make sure that we're not creating confusion. Where if I want to work with the department, where should I go? And so I think this is a good opportunity for us to continue building on that. Specifically with AFWERX, we have done some pretty radical reorganization over the last 4 months, and we've taken a bit of kind of three separate ad hoc innovation efforts. One of them is AFWERX, where we've really done with challenges, things we call spark cells, spark tanks, of kind of creating this competition internal among our airmen. Another is AF Ventures, where we have leveraged several $100 million of our SBIR budget, specifically reaching out to small companies. And then the third effort that we have put together is Agility Prime, which is the first of what we see are several different primes moving forward. In this case, the question with Agility Prime is, can we, if we look into the future, identify quickly those tech trends as we might have done in the small UAS sector, maybe 5G, several years ago, and use DoD as a bit of an incubator to bring that technology to fruition quickly, de-risking some of the technical challenges that they may see, reducing the regulatory risk across the commercial sector, right? The civil use as well as with military, and then eventually reducing the financial risk by becoming an early adopter for some of these technologies. So that's specifically related to electric vertical takeoff and landing. And so this reorganization for AFWERX, we really see with AF Ventures, this is, if we look at the Air Force and our current portfolio of capabilities, the question remains internal to DoD. How do we get to that set of future capabilities that we talk about often and has been mentioned here? So many of them don't necessarily find their way across the Valley of Death. And so when we looked at re-establishing AFWERX, bringing it under really these three pillars, the AF Ventures pillar of broadening the technology by broadening the commercial base, the Spark piece, and this is where we can look at great technologies that come from the non-traditional startups that are out there. And while those are fascinating, without the airmen there, without the operators that we have across our department, we're taking a different approach to requirements development as opposed to asking I come from, flying fighters, spent some time on the Joint Staff in the J8, working with the JROC process pretty significantly, looking at a different approach to capability development, not one where we're writing these volumes of requirements documents and then asking industry to go meet a requirement that maybe we don't even understand that well, but instead looking across the American innovation ecosystem and seeing how we can bring these small companies in. It requires us to innovate, not just the innovators in these small companies, but us to also innovate internal to the department, to think differently about future concepts of use. And so that's where our Spark Cell, down at the base level across our Air Force warfighting integration capability, at every level, looking at airmen to identify those gaps, to find those creative ways. And so creating that network that's out there. And in doing that, we have over the last couple of years brought in 1,400 contracts with companies. Of those 1,400 companies, 70% of them are new to DoD, and they're using this process of this open topic process internal to the SBIRs, where we allow the airmen really to start to focus these, working closely with our new lab. So Air Force Research Laboratory is where AFWERX is now located under our Materiel Command. So very much a capability development organization, but one that is very closely tied to the warfighter. And it's also one, as we start to look at these capabilities, being very closely tied to our program executive officers, so that when we identify in this AF Ventures process, promising technologies that are out there, quickly scaling those with a direct connectivity with the PEO, the lab, with AFWERX, and then with our capability developers internal to the Pentagon, so that we're getting that future budget that's necessary. Actually, right in the end, that is what makes the program a record. So these three pillars, foundation to all that is partnership. And so appreciate the opportunity to look at those other potential partnerships that are out there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, Nathan. Michael Brown, you're up next here, pal. Why is accelerating commercial technology and that dual use technology so important to the Department of Defense?
Well, thank you, Secretary Murphy, and thank you for having me. It's great to be here among friends. I think all of the panelists today are working on how to make the department move a little bit faster and how to make us more friendly for commercial technology. Of course, we have folks here who are focused on service needs, representing Army, Navy, and Air Force. And then Nand and I have joint responsibility to go across DoD to bring in some of these technologies. For everyone here, we all know that commercial technology is becoming increasingly important to the department. There was a day 50 years ago when the semiconductor industry was formed in Silicon Valley, where the Defense Department was leading in many of the technologies that it needed. That means the key investor, first customer, we were an early adopter. And that's changed now because so much of what's happening in the technology world is happening in the commercial sector, not starting in the military. There's much more R&D, probably twice as much commercial R&D as is happening with the federal government. Another big change from 50 years ago. So we want to make sure that our military has access to the very best that America can offer. And for a lot of these technologies, which are going to be game changing for the future, AI, which Nand is focused on, to autonomous systems, to cyber, these are being developed by leading companies as opposed to the government. So we have to reach into that ecosystem and make sure that we have access to that. That's certainly the concept, I think, with the tech bridges. How are we in the environments where, or in the ecosystems where the technology is being developed? Same with DIU, our offices are around the country in the innovation hubs. And we're trying to make sure that we have access to any company, no matter how small, that can bring something of value to the DoD. So I think increasingly we're going to be looking at commercial technology. We need to make ourselves friendlier, easier to work with, which is a tall order when you're talking about DoD. There's about 10 modernization priorities that the department has, and 8 of them are commercial technology. So it just speaks to how pervasive it is, how important it is for the future, and how we need to make sure that we, through everyone represented here today, is making it easier for those companies to work with DoD.
Yeah.
Over.
Well, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. And then not last but not least, again, given the rapid advancements of AI from a kind of a, frankly, a global perspective, what is Department of Defense's view on how the U.S. will lead with AI and ensure that its deployment in a way that is consistent with our values, vice those of our global competitors, say maybe China?
Wow, thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity, and hello to Mike and the rest of the folks. As he pointed out, it's we're all fellow journeymen in getting this technology adopted, both AI and more broadly, I think cutting edge tech. So here's how I'd answer the question. The bottom line is that technology advances the fastest where you invest. Back when I was an undergraduate in computer science, trying to do an AI-focused major, we were trying to model the brain, and we had ended up with a nuclear winter basically in AI. Sort of everything kind of collapsed because, in some sense, we weren't focused on where the demand was, and obviously the compute platforms and things just weren't there. So today, with ad tech and things that have sort of revived AI, it's no surprise that things are unfolding in a fairly predictable way. Now, if you're China and you're obsessed with building a police state, when you look at their investments, in sort of building that infrastructure, it's almost equal to the amount of money they're investing in their defense, sector. What you'll get is basically technologies that mature at a different rate than other ones where you're not making investments. So things like facial recognition, cyber tracking and filtering, things like that. When you're trying to build a particular end state, then those will obviously, sort of advance. Now, in our case, our military, DoD, we're subject to laws and regulations that we follow. We're actually the only military in the world that has actually adopted ethical standards and policies around AI and applying that. So February 2020, we actually adopted sort of combat and non-combat standards around responsible AI, equitable, traceable, reliable, and governable AI. So those are the core principles. So at a highest level, we have obviously a very big difference when it comes to sort of our national moral, ethical, and other sort of ways we approach technology and adopt it in this particular case. But there's actually a deeper issue that I think often gets swept, isn't really sort of talked about or thought about. So when you think of ethics, and you think of AI explainability, you think of AI testing, you think of security, all of these are actually highly tied together. So for instance, if you're trying to build ethical standards around adopting new technology, a core part of that is the explainability of technology. Now, in the case of AI, which is actually still fairly fragile in certain areas of investment or domains, you really don't have that level of explainability that you actually get from sort of logic-based or regular-based sort of software. And then that makes it hard to test. So for instance, we at the JAIC have a world-class testing organization, but we're still struggling, for instance, to test many parts of AI or software that we build. And similarly, when it comes to securing software, whether it be on the defensive side in terms of adversarial AI, et cetera, if you can't explain it, you can't test it, you really can't build those ethical sort of rules around it, and then you can't secure it. And then last but not the least, if you can't have the ethics pieces, you can't have explainability, you can't have testing, you can't have security, you can't have dependability. And at the core of systems, weapon systems, and things that we deploy out to our warfighters at the tactical edge, we can't give them systems that are not dependable, that don't work as advertised or as they're trained. So these are all highly, highly tied together. So the key answer, I think sort of the conclusion here is, on one end, there is sort of the ethics and the policies and sort of a societal aspect to this, but there's actually very hardcore tech reasons why many of these things diverge and why it's important for us to have some of these areas here. Over.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. All right, Frank, let me go back and turn back to you, if it's okay. Clearly, the other services stood up offices to tackle many of the opportunities and challenges that we've already highlighted today. What does Naval X learn from them, and how are you different? I know you mentioned earlier that you're only 18 months old and it's innovation pipeline, but how would you address that?
Yeah, sure. I'll explain a couple of things. I mean, we have been engaged with all of those different entities and are certainly now, I think we mentioned it, trying to say, okay, what can we take from what's already been done and sort of make that sort of Navy, Department of the Navy specific. One of the areas that I think is quite a big change that we made was a focus on the workforce. We talked about trying to be a better customer. We talked about, moving with some speed and urgency, and you're not going to be able to really do any of those things unless you can get the folks really understanding what the problem is. There's folks that I still talk to across the Department of the Navy that don't even understand, why it is that we're trying to reach out to a lot of these traditionals, these entrepreneurs and these startups. And so they don't always understand the problem. And so if we're going to move with speed and urgency, we really need to increase sort of the agility at both the individual level and at the organizational level. And so that has become sort of another focus area along with the tech bridges. So if you think about tech bridges as more of a focus in trying to sort of help folks on this journey through an innovation pipeline, the other piece is, how do we develop sort of the skill sets across the workforce to both understand the problem? And then in many ways, I've heard folks talk about this before, that this is not an acquisition problem, that this is really about, tools, the authorities, the methods. A lot of these things have already been provided to us, but there's not, I would say, broad understanding and awareness of, one, what they are, and two, how to use them and exactly when to use them. And so that's where Naval X has come in. So we've created some, several sort of both what I would call training courses, that range everything from human-centered design thinking, for example, and how to use lean startup, methods, and when you start to kick off like a project. And then there's other things like we've done where we've created playbooks on things like other transactions, on partnership intermediaries, on, crowdsourcing and things like that, and running a prize challenge. And so part of that is creating playbooks that folks can sort of learn from others that have already done this. So it's sort of finding the pockets of excellence inside of the Department of Navy who have learned to use these tools, and then finding ways that we can share them. The other thing that we've learned is sometimes just having a playbook that, we put on Intellipedia, it doesn't always garner the attention. And so we've learned, because if you think about we now have a workforce that ranges in age from 20 something up to 60 something. So, how do we appeal to all these different people? And so the idea of, taking a playbook, and it's not just some sort of a flat file, but we're now trying to turn it into podcasts, into visual storytelling, trying to make things a little more interesting, or people can consume the information on like you do sort of today, whether you're in the airport and you're on your iPad or you're at home, being able to consume the information where you want it, when you want it, on the device that you have with you. So part of this, again, like I mentioned, if we're going to be a better customer, if we're going to move with speed and urgency, it's working with the workforce to try to make them understand what really the problem is, why they need to be engaged into these ecosystems, why they need to be a better, customer, and make it easier for non-traditionals to work with us. And then providing them sort of the tools and other things, or access to the tools and workshops to learn how to use the tools to do that. And so, I've seen AFWorks do a lot of great things. I know, for example, like, some of the pitch days that they're having, they're doing this on a routine basis from DIU, the commercial solutions opening. Again, this is, hey, we've seen how they've done it. Now we're trying to take that and apply that specifically to the Department of the Navy to make sure our workforce knows what they're doing. So back over to you.
That's great, Frank. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you comment about the playbooks. So Len, let me turn to you at ALL. The playbooks that obviously NavalX is using, and the other services, AFWorks, et cetera. What are some of the lessons learned, some of the things that you're using, and give us some of the success stories from AAL, if you could.
Thank you.
Did you say, on the last question, did you say success stories from AAL, Army Applications Lab?
Well, I was going to turn to Len
just
for
in
that,
general,
Frank, if that's okay. But if you want to chime in or something.
I'll defer my time to Frank if he wants to give some success. That's right, because I'd like to riff off of where you're going with this too. I think what you brought up is excellent, but if you need a couple more minutes, I think what Mr. Gertz and what you're doing in NavalX is phenomenal. So if you want to take a couple minutes, it's fine by me.
Sure. I mean, just on the playbooks piece specifically, one of the more recent ones we've done is actually put together a cloud playbook. So, and in fact, Army, we've had recently the Army, the ECMO office, the Enterprise Cloud Management folks take some of our Center for Adaptive Warfighting training, and actually recently had a request for Army to host their cloud playbook on there. So we're working with a lot of different entities, because if you think of just cloud playbook in general, this is an example of, the policy's been out there as to, hey, we need to move mission software and a lot of these applications onto the cloud. But it's been a lot slower than we anticipated for folks really doing that. And the problem is there's a lot of different entities that are out there that really, they put out the policy, the guidance, there's engineering requirements, cybersecurity requirements, you name it. So we tried to pull all that together in sort of a central playbook, and others have done the same thing. And so one of the lessons, though, that we're having to do is how we get that information out there. And then I would say pull that entire community together behind that. And I like this idea now that, we're engaged with both Army and the Air Force. And so if you look at across all the services, this is what we can be learning from each other to really speed up this process of getting everybody in the cloud, so that we're sort of creating a digital engineering environment and other things that are going to form sort of the backbone in the enterprise. And I think that's going to really make us more agile and be able to move a little bit more speed. Back over to you, sir. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. Len, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, if I can riff off of what Frank was talking about, what excites me probably the most is I think there's a common understanding of how to lower the barriers of entry for small business. And I'll just use problem as an example. We talk about problems all day long, but I'll tell you, sir, there's probably nothing more complex than getting the problem right, to frame that problem out, to scope it out, to align stakeholders from the very beginning of that problem. And I think we're all talking the same thing and saying the same thing across each one of our panels. And that excites me, because that tells me eventually we're going to break this code. We're going to crack the code, and we're going to tap into as I think Mike said this in another panel a long time ago, there's about 80% of these small businesses that have solutions to Army problems, but we don't have access to them for a lot of different reasons. And I think we're getting to that. And I think starting with the problem and then looking for a solution, aligning those stakeholders and offering the proper incentives to small business will get to that, to include doing market research, robust market research that's focused on technology verticals that align to that problem. And if you put the stakeholder like a program manager from the very beginning that endorses that problem, well, that gives you greater opportunity to break down some of those barriers. So from my perspective, I think each one of us are doing that. And that really, truly excites me because that tells me we're making a difference. To circle back to your question about specifics, what have we learned? I'll offer one example and I'll pivot over to AFWERX and to Nathan. When we first stood up in the Capital Factory about 22 months ago, we watched AFWERX get after contracting like, holy cow. I mean, they're doing things that are just absolutely at warp speed. And we thought, what can we do? How do we do that? How do we replicate what they're doing? And if you look at what just happened last week with the rate of fire problem that General Murray referred to previously, we were able to steal a page out of AFWERX playbook, and we were able to get 4 of the 15 companies on contract 14 days after the date of solicitation closing. That has got to be a record somewhere for the Army. And that's never going to happen without going back to AFWERX and going, how do you do that? How do you figure that out? And we understand that each service has got their own approach. I mean, in fact, it's akin to an analogy that I like to offer to my folks in AEL. I mean, if you put 2 chefs in a kitchen and give them the same ingredients and give them the same recipe, it's probably going to taste a little bit different. And within Army Applications Lab, our approach is very unique to the Army, and that meal is going to probably be more akin to something that is a hybrid approach. But back to AFWERX, thank you for all those lessons learned, and we're going forward with that. And without folks like the Army Contracting Command Research Triangle Park, I can give you some names: Benetta McNeil, Nico, Chris Justice. Getting those 4 companies on contract in 14 days after the solicitation closed would have never happened. So specifically, some of the successes, quite frankly, sir, a success for AEL is just being here. And I'm not being facetious. Being here, working with folks like General Rafferty, Colonel Tim Fuller, and some of the other folks. I say that because it takes bold leadership, and I think I speak for each one of the panels. It takes bold leadership to empower organizations like AEL, like AFWERX, NavalX, and others. In my time, I've heard a lot of buzzwords: fail fast, agile thinking, smart risk taking. But it's that type of leadership at the very top that allows us to do exactly that. That gives us an opportunity to come up with an approach like this whole of acquisition approach that encompasses AFC and ASALT to traverse the valley of death, like we just did with the rate of fire problem. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it definitely answered mine. And listen, I thank you and General Murray and the whole team. It's been night and day, and just how fast we've grown, and incredibly important. I'm not sure if General Murray's still on. I know his thing is on. If you don't know, he's a huge Ohio State University fan. They play at Penn State this Saturday night on Halloween. So my goddaughter goes to Penn State, so I'm going to have to digress and let General Murray know that they're going to take an L this weekend. Sorry, Len, I digress.
If he's on, he's going to respond to that. I can promise you.
Yeah. So Nathan, let me turn to you and AFWERX if that's okay. In your first response, you did talk about partnerships. Can you share some examples of AFWERX examples on how you built those partnerships? And I know you talked about the 3 different sectors, but why don't you tell us what's been the most successful to date?
Sure, absolutely. And it's, to a large degree, a follow-on of fantastic comments that you just heard. Specifically starting with our joint partners. I talked in the last the internal partnership that we're doing with our Spark cells and getting our airmen, but the joint partners there, opportunities obviously to work among the group that's here. We have had with some of our SBIR processes opportunities where we've had this, OSD Strategic Capabilities Office, the Marine Corps. Actually put money directly onto Air Force contracts. How can we leverage maybe contracting so that we find these things when we're looking at emergent technologies? We may not know, hey, is this a better fit in the Air Force and the Army? Who knows? And so having a bit of ability to go across those joint lines, I think is extremely helpful. I think with DIU, really the launch that enabled Agility Prime that I spoke to earlier was really enabled by DIU, their initial outreach to some of the companies that are in that space. And so I think we've created, a bit of a prototype, largely from a process perspective, what that partnership looks like. On the other areas of partnership, spending a lot of time with investors, right? There are a lot of folks, not just in venture capital, but looking across private equity, looking across some of the strategic investors, family offices, where there are places that we can partner specifically, do co-investment, so that we're bringing to bear the entirety of the American innovation ecosystem, where there is and we're doing it in a way that is de-risking investment for those investors that are out there, as well as the taxpayer. A lot of excellent work that's happened on the interagency side. As we look at these emergent technologies, especially if they're going to be dual use technologies, we have to have those technologies be successful commercially. If they're going to do that, oftentimes there could be a pretty notable regulatory barrier there. Are there ways that we can help de-risk that process from the regulatory environment? So the interagency piece is essential. The international part, we're doing a space pitch day. When we look at our defense industrial base, we have to look at that capacity that the partner nations bring. There are many cases where there are technologies overseas that, with countries that we'll be fighting, hand in hand with, should we go to war. So how do we make sure that we're creating that tech sharing that's necessary? How do we do it? Obviously, we spend a lot of time on our larger programs. How do we do that in this startup ecosystem? And then the last piece is, going back a bit to workforce, this partnership with academia. We just released a press release yesterday. We've awarded $38 million for one of the largest small business technology transfer programs. So over 250 universities and research institutions partnered with the small businesses that really, we believe, is core. This is even prior in many cases to the small businesses even starting. This becomes that initial seed out there for our workforce in these new tech sectors, and that workforce quickly starting to commercialize those fantastic ideas, helping small companies grow to large companies, and large companies that not only support the security of our nation, but also the prosperity of America.
That's great, Nathan. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let me turn it over now to Michael Brown. Michael, quick, how do you measure success from the DIU perspective?
Defense Innovation Unit was set up by Ash Carter 5 years ago to accelerate getting commercial technology into the hands of the warfighter. That's the measure we use. How many of the projects that we do, we're about to start our 100th project, how many of those result in getting capability into warfighters' hands? As little as 2 years ago, we found that number was just over a third. And there's various reasons for that. One is, of course, sometimes the technology, because we're working with leading edge companies, it just flat doesn't work. Or it's not, as Nan pointed out, it's not reliable enough to be fielded yet by the military. What you use for a dating app technology is the cost of failure there's not the same as when you're talking about life and death that we're talking about in the military. So I'm fine with some percentage failing for that reason, but many projects won't get the technology out to the warfighter because we don't have the budget in place. We find that in many cases, the budget is just there for the prototype, and then no one planned the 2 years in advance that it takes to spend $1 in Department of Defense. That's a year working the department's budget and a year working with Congress. If you weren't planning for success and have that money already allocated, we get the vendor to the point of successful prototype. It does work in the military application. Thank you. Please wait while we now spend the time with our department budget and the time with Congress. As we know, China has probably a much less cumbersome process. We don't want their system, but I think they're able to move a lot faster. So I think that presents one of the obstacles that we have to getting the technology in the hands of the warfighter. We've started to put some of these pieces together now because we have experience over the last 5 years to get that now over 50, up to about 50%. And we want to see that grow even more than that. So that is the ultimate measure. How many of the projects we start get the technology into the hands of the warfighter so they can be using it. Then we're also looking at how many vendors can we bring on that haven't done business with DoD before. So we brought on about 65 companies that have not done business with DoD. We look at how much can we save money. If we're working with commercial technology, we ought to be able to save the taxpayer dollars. This is a way to stretch DoD's budget if we're not able to live in times where the Defense Department budget is growing the way we would like it, and we might face that in the future. So we believe we should be saving about 10 times our budget in DIU in taxpayer savings because we're using commercial technology. So those are some of the measures that we use.
I like that 10x in savings part. So thanks, Michael. Hey, Nan, same question to you from your perspective.
Great, thanks. I'll answer in two parts, and I'll actually try to take a little bit of a slightly sort of contrarian view, not a contrarian, but maybe a complementary view to some of this, but extend the discussion here. At the Jake, for instance, we have a big focus on, actually many of our projects work directly with DIU and some of the accelerators have been fantastic relationship, really on the supply side. The problem, in all honesty, I mean, I built and sold 4 companies before coming here to the DoD about 1.5 years ago. And I've got to tell you, just working here, I myself am horrified sometimes thinking about a startup doing business with the DoD. And the reason is, and part of it is acquisition. I think we've got all of the other panelists helping solve the supply side of the problem, which is making it easier for startups to work with the DoD. But I've got to sort of self-grade ourselves, give ourselves a low grade on the demand side of it. And there are 2 issues that I'll sort of talk about that actually really, really concern me. Number one is a lot of people have touched on the valley of death issue. And I've heard this, since I got here, the valley of death, the valley of death. The valley of death is not an existential issue that happens to you. It's a self-created issue. And I think the 3 panelists actually, including Mike, hit on this topic, which is, I find it incredible here that products and projects get built here without a customer being locked down in advance. If you did that at a startup, you would literally you would be kicked out of, a pitch, on University Avenue and Sand Hill Road where you didn't have customer demand, and you're building a company or a product that just really has no market. It's a brain, we call it a brain fart, but really not anything that, really has a demand side of it. So that's number one. The other problem is we do not have the set of systems and platforms inside the DoD that internet scale companies run out there to create economies of scale that software products give you. And we are struggling with that, for instance, on the AI side. And I jokingly call the Joint AI Center sound so glamorous. And, when I go back home in the Bay Area where I live, a lot of people are like, wow, you're doing all this amazing advanced AI work at the DoD. And the joke is I actually do a lot of sewer and plumbing work. I mean, I'm one step away from being Roto-Rooter here at the DoD because the platforms and systems and the software just doesn't exist to be able to pull those software systems in to deploy them. So yes, we can work fast. So I call this the work fast versus work better problem. A lot of people are focused on DevOps and better acquisition and faster acquisition with startups, et cetera. All fantastic work. That's what I call the work faster, or sort of how do we decrease the cycle times and get more quality. The problem is we have to complement that with work smarter, because if we don't have the set of software systems and platforms, if all of us were working over at one of our sort of large internet scale companies out there, one of the problems is we have a snowflake application problem where every single one of us takes a problem and buys a single application to go solve that problem. We don't think of this as getting the same architecture that we need to build to get better software. And my core piece is software is eating the world, and it's something that is absolutely going to be the main thing that will help us both sustain and win our competitive edge. So we got to get super, super smart, not in AI alone, but software systems, how we build them, how we acquire them, how we operate them inside the DoD. And that onus is on us. We can't blame industry. We can't focus on them to solve the problem. We have to set up the right conditions to be able to pull the stuff in and deploy it and run it at scale. So sorry for the little rant there, but I really feel, I feel very obviously very strongly and passionately to come work here at the DoD to do this. But all of us collectively on this panel and beyond, we're also responsible for the demand side of this. process to fix that.
Yeah, Nan, listen, I've created 3 companies and just had an exit on one of them. And I hear you on the self-created problem. You need to make sure you have a customer before you start building solutions, out there in the ether. I will tell you, for AFWorks, I'm a general partner at a venture capital firm. A couple of our folks have gone through the AFWork program. AFWork, and again, whether it's you or Nathan, if you want to comment, at least how they have kind of capitalized on this is they say, hey, if you want to come to us for small funding, $25,000, $50,000 in phase 1, what they call it, you have to have a letter from a unit saying this is a problem that we have, and you're partnering, how to solve it. Nathan, is that how you get through what Nan was talking about, how to make sure that you have these units have skin in the game and they're actually solving problems that they're currently facing?
That's exactly right. So it starts at those $50,000 level for those SBIR phase 1s. And it's not just from the operator, right, the end user, but it's also from the acquirer, so that you have someone that actually there's a demand signal for it. And there's then a program executive officer that's going to drive it across. That happens at the $50,000 level. Over this last year, we were able to get awards up to $15 million for SBIR phase 2s. We call it our Strat5 program, where we're getting that $50 million of SBIR funding, $15 million that was coming from that PEO or from that end user. So it was government, $15 million, within another $30 million of matching from the investment community going into that. So the point that Nan makes, I think, is spot on. Going in and building it and thinking that they're going to come. We have so many legacy platforms that there's got to be very deliberate action from the people who need the product to be able to pull it across the valley of death, to be able to actually begin modernizing in a way. And the other piece to that means also being pretty deliberate about what are we going to divest, because defense budgets are not getting any bigger. So that process of bringing the operator in through Spark, that is a critical piece, we think, to being successful going forward.
Yeah. Okay. So we're running out of time a little bit. So I know I said I'd give you all closing time, and I'm going to do that. But if you can keep your remarks, if you wouldn't mind, just keep them in 1 minute, closing thoughts, closing comments, appreciate it. And hey, Nan, why don't I start with you since you went last? I'll let you let the last go first at this round.
Sure. So I just think probably the most important thing that I get out of this is getting this particular group together. Again, I think we owe that to industry to a large degree. And I think several of them have mentioned there's great sharing that's happened. We have a good battle rhythm, at least with DIU, opening that up a bit more. That partnership and getting this innovation ecosystem across DoD with a coherent narrative, with an easy access, I think is a critical piece. Thank you all for facilitating that, and looking forward to continuing the discussions.
Great. Nan?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think you you all know where I stand on this. But just the fact that all 5 of us are on this call, on this panel together, points to the fact that there's a lot of great stuff happening. So on the negative side, it's like we got to get our act together to be competitive but if we're not going to grade ourselves hard, we're never going to get better. So I'm excited that this is all happening. Over at the JAIC, we're kind of trying to do our part to enable sort of that architecture, that system. We have something called the Joint Calvin Foundation that we're building. That is a DevOps environment, an AI DevOps environment with data, curated data. Obviously for AI, that's a huge part of that was covered previously in the panel. But getting the sort of supply side and the demand side right, for me, the future of, as I said, warfare is software. And I have a term I use for this, which is software-defined warfare. The level of flexibility, the level of, sort of cost curves that we can drive down. We at the DoD are a very hardware-centric organization, a vertically scaled hardware-centric organization. We have to be world-class in internet-scale software for us to have that competitive edge and keep that competitive edge. So I just can't overemphasize how important this pivot is for us. And we can't pay lip service to it. We have to go all in on this game to stay competitive. So thank you.
Of course. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Hey, Len, I'm going to go to you next. I just want to comment the hoist in that aircraft behind you. One of the F work companies invested in this company called Vita that I'm familiar with that had the stabilizing force of those hoists so you don't spin around when you're saving our heroes in harm's way. But Len, closing comments.
Thanks for that, sir. I'd like to thank the companies that we've interacted with for helping us understand the space, to give us that empathy that's required to address what Nan talked about. And I'll tell you, for that, we will ensure that we will continue to work towards providing you a way forward that's going to be profitable and meaningful. And then I think, as important, everyone behind us, each one of us on this panel, have a workforce behind us. And in my 2 years working in this space, I have never seen a force more committed, more passionate to making a difference. And I think I speak for everyone on this panel. To my team, Army Applications Lab, thank you for being all in every day.
That's awesome. Appreciate it. Hey, Mike Brown, let's go to you, bud.
Yeah, I think building off what Nan said, we're in a pivot, and it's a pivot to use more commercial technology. It's a pivot to go faster. It's a pivot to change our processes within DoD, and it's not going fast enough. So we are now in a tech race with China, and it needs to be informing the measures. The measure needs to be speed. How fast can we go to get the things done that we need to do? And I'd have to give us a pretty low grade on that. So we need to double down and make sure we can move at the right speed, what Secretary Mattis calls speed of relevance.
Great. Thanks, Michael. And last but not least, Naval X. So Frank, why don't you close us out here, and I'll turn it over to Mitch.
Yes, sir. Yeah, just to echo some of the other comments, I think the new front lines and the battlefield for a lot of the technology is right here, in the U.S. And I think China knows where those front lines are. They're certainly been trying to get involved in both our universities, try to get at the technology anywhere they can. So I really do think this can't be just, these innovation organizations trying to sort of pull this whole ship, this whole department forward in thinking about this problem. We really need the entire department to be sort of an innovative and a more agile organization, because the front lines are already here, and we need to be investing in these ecosystems. We need to be investing in the technology, in the software, in the talent. And if we don't, we're going to lose this future war today, because that's where I believe the front lines are. So thank you for this great opportunity, and I appreciate being on this great panel with everybody. Back over to you, sir.
Thanks, Frank. Mitch Johnson, back to you, my friend.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Secretary Murphy. Really appreciate your leadership and for driving a tight ship. I mean, this group is right on schedule. You guys rock. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure working with each and every one of you panelists and your teams. I found the dialogue scintillating. You guys did a fabulous job, and the second panel is going to have a hard act to follow. So thank you so much. I think we're now being right on schedule. We have time for a 15-minute break. We'll resume at straight up 11 o'clock Eastern for our second panel. Thank you very much, gentlemen.